want to welcome you back to this study in the book of Galatians. We're so glad that you've decided to join us. Now today we're in Galatians, the 4th chapter, starting with verse number 20. Now the Apostle Paul goes back to this situation that's very dire in the churches of the Galatian region. He goes back to this thing of people wanting to be Jewish and act like Jewish. And not only do the Jews want to be Jewish, but they want to make the Gentiles Jewish. Now, let me just say this. I believe that Jewish people should be following some of the customs, not to make them righteous, but to stay within their heritage. You understand? Because even Moses was made righteous because of his faith, not because of the law. Do you understand that? But then to go and to look at a Gentile, a person who is without God completely, and say, you need to be Jewish, you know what? You're bringing them under the same bondage that they've been in, and that is a bondage to idols. You see, in the Galatian region was filled with idols, filled with idol worship. So you had idol worshipers on one side, you had the Jewish people on the other side, and the Apostle Paul says, this is the truth. This is how you can be free. You need to follow the truth. Now in verse number 20 or 21, the Apostle Paul says this. He says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? What's he saying? He's addressing this segment of people over here, this segment of people that say you got to be under the law. You got to do what the law says. If you're going to be justified, if you're going to be right with God, that's what the word justified means. If you're going to be righteous before God, you've got to keep the law. And so the Apostle Paul now is targeting them. But he's targeting them in a way that's different. Now he's looking at them and he's talking to them about something that's very special. And it's called covenant. Now let me just take a minute here just to tell you what a covenant is. A covenant is an agreement. It's a promise. It's an agreement that between two parties, and they make a covenant together. Nowadays, we would probably use this word contract, but nowadays it seems like contracts got less importance and less strength than they used to have. But back in those days, a covenant was made. You know, I remember my dad saying to people, you know what, a handshake is good enough for me. I think I've said that to people. A handshake is good enough. In other words, I'm making an agreement with you. I don't need a contract. All I need is for you to agree with me and show that you agree by shaking my hand. So the Apostle Paul, instead of going back to this discussion of the law and being justified by the law or being justified by faith and grace, the Apostle Paul now is approaching it in a different way, but he approaches it with a hypothetical question. He says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, do you listen to the law? Do you really obey the law? Do you listen to what the law says? And then the Apostle Paul begins to point them to verse number 22. He begins to point them to covenants. And verse number 22 says this, for it is written that Abraham had two sons, one by a bondwoman and one by a free woman. Now, for those of you who don't know Old Testament history, Abraham was a man, he was up very old in age. He and his wife both, and they were childless. And God comes to Abraham and he says, Abraham, I am going to make you the father of many nations. And you know what happens? Nothing. For a long period of time, nothing at all happens. And you know what Abraham does? Abraham says, you know what? I just need to do this myself. You see, the child that he had from Hagar was a child of the flesh. It was a child that came as a result of doing something outwardly, of having a sexual relationship with his slave. And so he had a son. He had a son named Ishmael. And you know what happened? Later on, God fulfills the promise to Abraham and Sarah. And they have a son, and his name is Isaac. Now let's go back to verse number 22. For it is written that Abraham had two sons, Ishmael and Isaac. And one was from the bondwoman, one was from Hagar the bondwoman, and one was from the free woman who is Sarah. Now, verse number 23. But the son of the bondwoman was born according to the flesh. Now, let me just stop there for a little while. One thing that we need to understand is anything that's born or comes out of the flesh is not going to be able to prove righteousness before God. You see, if you go out and you say, I am not going to sin, I'm not going to sin, I'm going to keep the law, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, you know what? That is a flesh decision. It's something that's coming out of your flesh. And you know what? It will never make you righteous before God. Some people say, well, if I do this and I do that and I don't do this and I don't do that, then I'll be righteous before God. No, what you're doing is you're depending upon the flesh. Instead of something that's born out of the spirit of a man, which is true righteousness and holiness, you're trying to bring forth righteousness and holiness born out of your flesh, out of your carnality. So, again, verse number 23, but the son of the bondwoman is born according to the flesh, and the son of the free woman through a promise. Now, we're going to talk about covenant tomorrow, because a promise is making a covenant with someone. Isaac was born out of Sarah, but he was born because of a promise made by God to Abraham and to Sarah. Do you understand that? I hope you join us again tomorrow as we get into this, study and look at these two covenants. God bless you till we speak to you again.